Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's MDICx webinar. My name is Stephanie Christopher. I'm the Program Director for the MDIC Case for Quality, and I'm delighted to be able to share this webinar with all of you today on an update on our Case for Quality Voluntary Improvement Program. We have a great set of speakers here today to share about the Case for Quality VIP. Kim Kaplan from CMMI Institute and George Zack from Two Harbors Consulting will share an update from the CMMI perspective on the current state of the appraisal program. Francisco Vicenty from FDA will share the agency's perspective on the current Case for Quality VIP initiative and some of the metrics they've been seeing as participants have been sharing data as part of this program. And then finally, I'm delighted to have Mark Rutkiewicz here with us. Mark is from Innovize, and Innovize has been involved with the Case for Quality and the Voluntary Improvement Program since very early on, and he's going to talk a little bit about his experiences with the CMMI appraisal, both as a whole, but also his experiences as the program is now going into year 2, and the differences of what this appraisal process looks like for sites as they go into their second year in the program. So as always, if you have any questions, we will have some time for Q&A at the end of the session. You can submit your questions either through the chat box, or there's also a Q&A box as well, and I'll be keeping an eye out for those questions, and we'll make sure to give lots of time for questions and discussion at the end of the program. So with that, I will turn it over to Kim and George to start us off with an update from CMMI.
Thanks, Stephanie. So as Stephanie mentioned, this is the Case for Quality Voluntary Improvement Program, also known internally at the Institute as the Medical Device Discovery Appraisal Program. And I'll be speaking here with my colleague, George Zack. Next slide. All right, so I'm sure most of you are familiar with this program, but for those who are not, it is leveraging the CMMI framework, which is a set of best practices that have been proven for the last two and a half plus decades, using this framework as the standard model by which medical device manufacturers can measure their capability to produce high quality devices with the ultimate goal of increasing patient safety. At the bottom, you'll see some of the other effects that we're hoping to see from those organizations leveraging CMMI, such as a reduction in defects, rework, costs, while also accelerating time to market and increasing customer, or in this case, patient satisfaction. As a result of engaging in this program, FDA is adjusting their submission requirements as part of recognition of manufacturers' involvement in this program. Next slide.
Okay, so for those of you familiar with the program, a lot of this will be review, but as Kim mentioned, we will be going over this just as background information. So organizations that are eligible for this program are medical device manufacturers that distribute products into the US and have no OAI or official actions indicated in the last 5 years. As Kim mentioned, to be involved in this program, the manufacturer facility undergoes a CMMI appraisal to assess how that facility is standing against the CMMI framework in certain practice areas and what capabilities they're demonstrating. As she also mentioned, because of that, by way of involvement, organizations receive a variety of benefits, including, as it says here, the foregoing of surveillance inspections. What we see here on the right is the high-level flow chart that an organization would apply. The CMMI Institute would process that application. The FDA does checking that there are none of those official actions indicated for that particular facility in the last 5 years. We look to turn that all around within 5 days. And then, assuming that the organization is approved into the program, there is a planning that occurs between the CMMI PMO, an appraisal team, the organization, that facility that's actually being appraised, to land on all the particulars of scoping, which products we're going to be looking at, who's going to be involved, the scheduling, and defining an appraisal plan. When that's then, we look to turn that around within that 60 days of enrollment. Once that the appraisal is executed, once that plan's in place, the organization does get that routine inspection benefit, Then we look to execute that particular appraisal on-site in the organization within 90 days. Kim will give a little bit of an update, or one of us will give an update later on as to where we're sitting with that 90-day goal. Next slide, please.
All right, so once the appraisal has been executed on the right-hand side, the results are then submitted back to the Institute, where we do a quality review and quality assurance check to make sure that the appraisal was in fact executed according to the requirements. We then aggregate those results and submit that aggregate version to FDA for review. Once FDA receives that submission, the manufacturer is then eligible for submission modifications. About 90 days after their appraisal is completed and quarterly thereafter, the manufacturer will be going through checkpoints with their lead appraiser to discuss what's changed since the last time they spoke. So have they acquired new organizations? Are they developing new products? How are they tracking to the improvement activities based on the results of their appraisal? What are their performance metrics saying about the impact of those activities? We send that data over to FDA as well, so that we can all see how that performance is impacted as a result of these activities. So that's supposed to happen quarterly after the appraisal, and then around the 1-year mark, we expect currently an annual appraisal. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that some of the submission benefits that manufacturers are eligible for are the manufacturing change notice submission, which is now streamlined and accelerated. I'm sure our FDA colleague will talk more about that. Manufacturing site changes, also streamlined and accelerated, and we're finalizing original PMA submissions as well. Next slide.
Okay, so for those of you involved in the program, that was just a quick overview of a high-level view of what the appraisal process looks like and what particular benefits an organization gets from participating in the program. Here what we have is a list of the primary stakeholders in the program. So we have a pilot steering committee that essentially provides direction for our pilot program, our program that's now transitioning into a full program. Of course, the FDA is a key stakeholder. They are the organization that's providing those regulatory modifications. They're verifying participants that they are eligible to participate. They're reviewing those aggregated results as well as performance results that are coming back from the organization. We have MDIC here. Stephanie, our representative of MDIC on this very phone call. They're working with us in getting the message out and providing this safe in webinars such as this, as well as other case for quality forums, and providing that safe space between industry and the agency to further discuss programs like this, the Voluntary Improvement Program, as well as other initiatives in the case for quality. We have, of course, the appraisers that are performing that appraisal work. They're performing that planning and that scheduling and working with the site to actually execute the appraisal. There's actually 2 categories within this appraiser set. We have our lead appraisers, the folks that actually are the team lead that execute the particular appraisal, and then the appraisal team members in there. So they're also a source of input to the program as to ways that we can potentially improve the program. Of course, we have the medical device manufacturers, those facilities that are actually participating in the program. They are the recipient of the appraisal. They are the recipient of that facility is the recipient of the regulatory benefits. And they're also participating in those, in addition to participating in the appraisal, they're participating in those regular checkpoints, those quarterly checkpoints that Kim mentioned. And then very here at the bottom, we have a pretty big list of activities that the CMMI Institute Program Management Office does to facilitate and manage this particular program. Everything from accepting that enrollment to pushing the data over to the FDA, to lining up the appraisers, to collecting the results post the appraisal, to facilitating some of the working groups that we're going to be talking about here in a couple slides. Pretty much all the nuts and bolts that make the program go on a regular basis, including the collecting of the data, collecting of improvement information, and learning experiences to continue to improve the program. So these are our key stakeholders. Next slide, please.
Thanks. As George mentioned, one of the really key aspects of this program is that it is continuously evolving and adapting based on feedback and lessons that we're learning as we move forward. And as part of that, we have some active working groups that are working to help define where do we take this program next, where do we dive deeper, where do we expand. So the current set of working groups we have are these 6. So the first one here, additional regulatory benefits, this working group and all of these working groups have stakeholders from participants, FDA, MDIC, the Institute, occasionally one of our appraisers may be involved as well. So we're involving all of the key stakeholders here. So this first group is looking to identify how we develop and expand or modify different regulatory modifications based on the needs of FDA and participants alike. The performance measures working group is looking into how we can continue to provide better data transparency, identify the right sorts of metrics depending on the organization's needs and FDA's needs, and how that synergizes with other appraisal activities. Reappraisals and multi-site appraisals working groups are both working on how we modify appraisals in the out years. Program features is actually working with another working group through MDIC to define new and desired features of the program, as well as undesirable features that we may want to resolve. And then the medical device context group is working on including medical device language that can help with the translation between the CMMI set of best practices and the medical device industry lingo. Next slide.
So we've identified various success factors in this pilot, and as it continues to transition into a full program, first and foremost is the value to the participants, those stakeholders that I previously mentioned. But in particular, what we're looking here is the survey results that we get back from participants in the actual appraisals. But we also do look at that appraiser feedback, FDA feedback, and lessons learned that we are then collecting and taking and bringing back into the program. In some cases, those might be minor tweaks just to the program or a template or something in the technical tool that we're using. In other cases, it gets blown into some of those full-on working groups and bringing that back as an issue that we ask those working groups to help us resolve. What's our next regulatory benefit, as an example? Another measure that we have, or a way that we identify success that actually translates into measures, might be the better way to say it, is this consistency and scalability category, which is really about our program adoption. And so, as you'll hear here in the next slide, we're always taking a look at how many facilities have enrolled into the program, how many companies does that represent, how are we scaling, how are we assuring that we're able to cover to scale with the number of appraisers and appraisal team leads. What's the amount of time that that's taking from an organization enrolling to their appraisal actually occurring? And then finally, there is the open-ended, longer-term steps of where do we take this program? What does this mean? How do we evaluate how executing appraisals and providing these organizations feedback on their maturity and their capabilities, how that impacts their particular product quality? So with that, we're taking a look at how those organizations are trending in terms of their appraisals, and also considering that against the quality performance metrics that they're providing, and looking at how those things are potentially linked over time. Next slide.
So George mentioned the different success components, one of them being the program adoption. So currently we have 45 actively enrolled facilities in the program representing 22 different companies. So far, all time, we've executed 45 appraisals, and 5 of those being year to date. We're tracking on how quickly we're able to complete these activities. So from the time of enrollment to the execution of the appraisal, you saw earlier, our goal is about 90 days. Right now we're tracking at about 116 days, which is significantly lowered from when we first started, and we're about 153. So we are tracking on improving that velocity. In terms of the number of appraisers we have in this program, we have an onboarding and vetting process. So currently we have 18 that have been vetted and certified to deliver these appraisals in the program, and we have 20 plus that are pending somewhere along in that vetting onboarding process. In addition to that, one of the interesting things that we've actually learned in this program is the use of internal or embedded team members. So these are individuals within the participating manufacturers that get trained in CMMI and are able to participate in the appraisal and better understand those results and help to drive towards those continuous improvement activities within their organization. So we've had 37 participants from these organizations go through that training process, and nine members from FDA as well. Next slide.
Hey, Cam, why don't you also take this one as well, please?
Sure. So George also mentioned program effectiveness. We largely gather this information from our post-appraisal surveys. So you can see this one at this point in time, we have 207 survey respondents. So in terms of experience with the appraisal, about 91% had a positive experience with the appraisal and the remainder neutral, so no negative experiences yet. In terms of whether or not the appraisal identifies opportunities that would directly impact product quality, about 86% of survey respondents believe that the appraisal did, in fact, identify those opportunities. 98% of respondents saw no conflict with compliance requirements, and in fact, many commented that this was in fact complementary and would help them improve their compliance. 94% of the respondents believe that outside of value to product quality that the appraisal had value add to their organization. And we used to ask, would you recommend this pilot to a colleague, yes or no? And we had about 100%, I think it was like 99.8% say yes, but we've recently changed the question to on a scale of 1 to 10. How likely are you to recommend this? This is known as the Net Promoter Score. And the range is -100 to +100, and we are currently at a +46.
So,
yeah, go ahead. Next slide.
Yep.
Thanks.
So as we progress this program throughout 2017 and 2018, there have been a variety of these sorts of sessions. So you'll see there's a variety of links here, including going back to MDICx webinars, just like this session, the recordings and the slides. There's been also articles from the MedTech Insight online journal that you can go to. FDA public meetings. There's also been a variety of podcasts on it through Greenlight Guru. So there's a lot of links and information here that you can dig into if you'd like to hear additional information on it. Of course, if you're seeking general information, FAQ, and even want to reach out to the CMMI Institute to potentially become involved in the program, there is that general information link there, and that will get you in touch with the CMMI Institute to address any additional questions that you have. But at this point, I think what we'd like to do is turn this over to Cisco so that Cisco can speak to FDA perspectives on the program.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks, Kim and George. All right, so I mean, I really want to get through some of this fairly quickly, but I think there's some exciting information that at least we can provide an update on, and then really give some time to Mark to get through his piece, because I think as much as we present out here, it really is a much better story from the people who are going through it. If we go to the next slide. One more. All right, so I think you heard some of the pilot metrics already from Kim, but this is a little bit more of a breakdown, and I do have a typo in there. It's 45 active sites, alignment with what Kim had mentioned beforehand. You know, a few of them have been multi-site appraisals. This is a brief breakdown of what types of products are built at each location, how many of the participants right now have been acknowledged as small businesses. So we do have a wide range of participants, some that are not necessarily just PMA sites, class 2, class 1 only sites. We even got a recent one that is not necessarily even a full med device manufacturer, but got a lot of value from other impact sites that were participating that they want to expand and extend it to other things within their portfolio. You know, we've waived several of the inspections. The sites are not all US based. There's 16 of them that are foreign sites. The change metrics, some of the stuff that we put in internally from a standpoint of the 30-day modifications, They are site-specific, so it is very limited in terms of volume coming through, but we've got the opportunity to start expanding that moving forward. But we've gotten a lot more than 45 changes that have come through that modified process. We are learning, where we find a line of it tripping into something a bit more complex or requiring a little bit more effort, so that we can identify either to set expectations appropriately, how to improve those in some way, shape, or form. But the majority of them have been reviewed by the teams in less than the 5 days committed. We have been trying and really reaching out, and I really have to thank the review teams on this side for their willingness to really stretch in terms of how do we do things a little bit differently, and how can they look at this information differently, and what can we do with it. So they've really stepped up in terms of really trying new things and finding internal improvements to be able to drive some of these numbers, their own learning, their own engagements with the participants in order to create a better feedback mechanism on what we can improve. So the other aspect of this was the site transfers. We have a model and template pull it out. Our goal was to take that site transfer process, because there's a lot that can be leveraged in terms of learning, and go from what is the targeted 180 days now for that submission. And I know it was a big stretch, bring it down to 10 business days. We have one in sight. It's currently past 35 days, so we've blown the original target, but we have been working to find out and identify what was causing it and how do we improve that process. So this has been similar to what we did with the 30-day notice, a learning opportunity. What can we do? How do we improve? How do we modify and find the gaps in our system in order to really drive some of these targets and improvements? Next slide. So I think you already heard some of what Kim reported. She's got much better numbers up to date here, so we can move on from there. I think these are the ones that I think really start to get people's attention, because as we're really looking to summarize outputs and impact of the case for quality, the focus on quality and the approaches leveraged from the maturity appraisal and what they're providing insight into, what we as an agency are doing, and how the impact of even the modified 30-day notices is having. We've been pulling some of this data back from both manufacturers, things that we've been engaged in and learning internally. So it really has provided a wide range of results. Some of them are a little bit unexpected, but generally all been very, very beneficial. From a patient standpoint, we've been really able to track and trend a lot better now based on the modified submissions, the types of changes, which ones are truly improving product quality, what the impact of accelerating them is. We've gotten, at least from an impact standpoint, some of the changes have had direct patient results. One of them actually resulted in 182 additional patients who received treatment who would not have otherwise received it in the course of the year. So from our standpoint, that's the kind of impact that we are looking to make sure we're seeing and we're driving with some of the modifications and changes. The additional focus of that and those additional treatments that happen, that's an extra $10 million in savings in the overall healthcare system, because there is data available for the types of comparatives on the treatments. Defect reduction rates. From an FDA standpoint, I think we've got, or seeing an increase in some of these submissions focused on product quality, things that maybe organizations weren't able to get to beforehand, just because of a resource issue. More engagement with the sponsors, more visibility. So how do we shift and allocate our inspections and review? Best practice sharing about manufacturers. This isn't about us. This really is about the collective ecosystem, and that's something that we've seen happen significantly over the course of the pilot, is companies really working for the betterment of the whole industry and for the patient outcomes. Things that originally we thought would never happen because people would be in competing spaces completely the opposite has occurred. They are really looking to learn as much as possible from each other. The pilots themselves, as we've done it, and in the course of the year, some have gone through their second assessment, we've actually been able to see significant improvements in some of the practice areas that were covered based on the feedback that they originally got and what strategies they implemented to address those. And I think from a manufacturer standpoint, we've shown some of these numbers beforehand, but we have more of them. The differentials in savings between an FDA and MDSAP audit to an appraisal is significant in terms of the amount of time and effort dedicated FTEs to really managing or responding to the audit. Some of the 30 days, we are getting some really good and positive impact results, everywhere from $280,000 in annual savings for one particular change that went through, better use of the FTE resources on site, increases in production capacity, one that actually resulted in greater than $50 million revenue impact for that company because of the sales and the increased capacity. The idea or the focus on really implementing more strategic improvements versus just responding and reacting to a 43 or compliance observation. So I think on the net, we've seen some really positive results with the pilot. It's really been an engagement, a collaborative engagement. It's driving, I think, some of the benefits that we're hoping and we were intending to on the whole case for quality effort and initiative. It's what's really giving us the impetus for continuing, for trying to drive some improvements, trying to expand the focus of the pilot. If we go on to the next slide. So what's going on and what are we working on next? Well, that summary report, we're finalizing that to make that public so people can see what it is that we were seeing. I assure you there probably won't be a lot of extra surprises from there. We'll just have more numbers and data around. We did get budget authority to help support the effort, so we are working on that and figuring out how to translate that into something that is sustained and operational from this side. So that's in the works right now, and while that's happening, we are still continuing testing, we're still continuing enrollment, and we're still continuing expanding and improving the efforts and all the learning that we're taking in and expanding some of these engagements as long as we've got the capacity on both the appraisal side and the FDA side to manage them. Next slide. And you saw a list of links. I've also got a list of links available here for anybody who wants to just kind of reach out, contact us, find out more information. Those are available there. And with that, I think we can get to, the person who was probably better suited to give you and share their experience and turn over to Mark.
Hi, thanks, Cisco.
Mark, I've given the screen control over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you all for attending today. I'm going to just basically cover Innovize's background, our continuous improvement path and our culture, and then the 3-year results. So you're going to see, I'm going to be presenting actual results from our assessments and show how the changes have occurred over time and why. And we're going to talk about some of the things that you would expect and some of the things that were brought up as we were discussing this program early on. Some of those things have actually come to fruition as you look through the Innovize set of data. Okay. Okay, so Innovize, we're a contract manufacturer in St. Paul, family owned, about 160 employees. We make converted products and components for the industry. We have about 200 different customers, medical device companies that are customers, 2,000 different products. We're FDA registered, and we make about 35 finished devices, not our designs, others' designs. So we're just a manufacturing house. In 2013, I started at Innovize, and we had the typical ISO certifications. We were building to the FDA quality system. But, and the procedures were typically written more ISO, FDA, just requirements-based, not really process-based. So before this whole project even started, I had started Innovize down a new journey of a new kind of quality system to do continuous improvement in the processes. So we started a process architecture conversion similar to what was discussed in ISO 1345, but then I actually documented some of this stuff in a couple of books about this process, which I've done in about 6 different med device companies previously. So really what I want to get to is, this is sort of a diagram I've used in the past. As you look along the bottom, that's sort of the compliance level. So companies can be, if you're, say, a level 1, you're getting warning level letters at the beginning of inspections. Level 2, you get 483s. 3, you're compliant, and then 4, you're bulletproof, and 5, you're world class. And so you can go around the x-axis and improve there. But if you get to a point, though, sometimes what's happened is most companies get to a level 3 and they stop because you're compliant. So I was always trying to improve processes in companies, and so I was always looking at the y-axis, continuous improvement. So, are you more reactive versus proactive? And as you improve your maturity, you move up the scales. And so I was always trying to work on Innovize and other companies, trying to move them up to the continuous improvement scale. Now, what I've seen over the years is you don't really want to be in the lower right quadrant. You're compliant, but then you're just you're throwing a lot of resources at it, and so it's more wasteful compliance. Or as you go up the continuous improvement process, yes, you're highly improved, but you really don't understand the requirements, which means you don't have all the aspects of the model, like in the CMMI model, taken into account, because you don't understand the requirements. So you're in delusional improvement. You really want to move up to the upper right quadrant. So what happened then in 2016? So I started this journey here at Innovize. We had an FDA QSIT in January of 2016. We had no findings. So we got involved. I was starting involved with the team, and part of the initial part of the project was FDA wanted to see, what does this look like? Cisco was like, what does a CMMI assessment even look like? So we volunteered for a proof of concept assessment in June of 2016. FDA was watching, other people were watching over a video conference of a 1-day assessment. It was a simpler one, shorter. It was like I said, it was more of a conversation on how you do your work and not an odd, and that was what was seen. We were using the CMMI model version 1.3, which is the older version of the model. We were looking at maturity level 2, and we were just covering configuration management and requirements management, 2 basic core aspects of the model. And it's also some of the core aspects of the FDA regulations. I mean, this is really document control. It really covers. So that was part of the initial assessment in June of 2016. So this is our results from that first assessment. So we had requirements management, we got a score of 59, and configuration management, we had 49. And we knew at that time, we had significant issues. We were using an ERP system that wasn't we didn't have change control ability within the ERP system we were using. We were using more of a job shop ERP system that was more quotes to jobs, and not really doing change control. And we knew this, and we actually had started the project a couple of years before to implement a new ERP system that we could do change control. And the timing was fabulous on how this worked out with the CMMI assessment. So here's our results. Like some areas improvement, some areas look good, but the intent of the proof of concept was to say, does the model work for medical device companies? So later that year, we had a pilot assessment. So we wanted to expand out now that proof of concept was done. Let's look at a few companies and do a pilot assessment. So we had launched, between this June and October, we had launched our new ERP system in August 1st, 2016. The pilot assessment was in October, so 3 or 4 months under our belt there. So the pilot assessment, we were still using the CMMI model version 1.3 and maturity level 2, but we expanded the practice areas that were covered. We still did configuration and requirements, but we're looking at project planning, project monitoring, supplier agreement, measurement analysis, and process and product quality assurance. These have changed in version 2. Some of these are the same, some of them have changed in names, but I'll sort of show you how they align together. And so our results in October, you can see here requirements and project planning and stuff like that. Our numbers overall were improved, and specifically the requirements management and the configuration management numbers improved significantly from previous. And that was because of the controls that the ERP system put in place. This really helped show that, making a continuous improvement project, the model actually will give you results that show that you did make that change. This was great data. It helped sell everybody that, the CMMI model is going to be a workable model for the industry to go forward with.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
This is Stephanie. I have a question that came in, and I think it actually really points to this current slide. Can you maybe touch on how that final percentage kind of corresponds to, or if it corresponds to the maturity level that you achieved?
Yes. So we're doing this is all maturity level 2. As part of the model, there's all these practice areas are required for maturity level 2. So if you want to say you're at the maturity level, there's more to it than just these assessments to really be certified to maturity level. We're assessing to the questions in the practice areas. We're not providing any documentation at this stuff. We're just talking to people. This wasn't all the practice areas of level 2 even. So we're covering some of the, this is a majority, but not all of them. And also, as you note here, see these SP 1, 2, 3, and then we have GP, general practice areas. In 2.0 of the model, this all changes around significantly. There's governance and implementation infrastructure that the generic practices replaced. So as we go forward to the first real assessment in the program, you'll see how these numbers change. So does it the final percentage to maturity level? 83% means that we are sort of 83% compliant to the maturity level. That's approximately what it means. It's just how good you're getting. And it's really for yourself. It's not to compare to anybody else. It's like, how am I doing year over year? And so that's at the end, I'll show you how Innovize is doing. And like the intent of the whole program is to be on a continuous improvement path. And are we making continuous improvements? And is the numbers getting better or worse? And you're going to see in some areas the numbers do get worse. And there's reasons for that. So as we move on to the
Mark, you may need to click on the screen once again to restart. There you go.
There we go. Okay. So in July of 2017, so this is about 7 months later, the FDA launched the Voluntary Medical Device Manufacturing and Product Quality Pilot Program. That's its official name. There's no goal, like I said, to achieve a level. You stay on the journey. And, I was on the call, and we were the first company to sign up, but we weren't the first company assessed. 6 months later, in December, we had our ISO audits tying in there too. So as we then did that assessment, we continue to improve our processes with our ERP system. So once I think you all know, if you've put a new ERP system, day one, you're not really up and running to the optimum peak performance. So this is about a year and a half later after the ERP, and we're trying to get, improve our processes and optimize with the new tool. During this time frame, during the switchover, we actually got certified to the new versions of ISO 9001 and 1345. So there were some upgrades, a lot of quality system procedure upgrades just for that. And then now with the initial assessment, we were looking at CMMI version 2 of the model. We still stayed at maturity level 2, but now we expanded to 11 practice areas, which is more the standard. And that's actually something we'll be talking about at the end here of which practice areas you should be looking at. So here's the results of our December 2017. Estimating is in there now, which wasn't in there previously. Planning, monitoring and control, configuration management, managing performance and measurement, requirements development, process quality assurance, governance, implementation, infrastructure, product integration, technical solution. So here our number is at 83%. Most areas are satisfied. So it actually was, if you looked from here, we had a lot, I don't know, just from a heat map point of view, it's about maybe 1/3 are partials and 2/3 are satisfied, where here it's like almost like 10% are partial. So overall, an improvement, more areas were assessed, so it's more complete, and this is the model that most of you, if you've been assessed for the areas, the practice areas that would be looked at. So we had a couple areas of implementation infrastructure, and that's new because that was usually part of the generic practices area. And managing performance and measurement, an area that we need to work on. So you can see this, the practice areas numbers across the top. So that's our December 17th. So as we continued on, our second assessment, Innovize continued, we were still optimizing. We knew even at that point in time, we were still having problems on implementing parts of the tool, trying to use a scheduling. The whole concept of change control on parts was being implemented as part of the new ERP system, and people were trying to understand how to manage that. One of our key areas that we saw between the two were the production side was working fine, but during development, how do you, new products were coming in all the time, how do you make sure you manage those effectively? And what we find is you couldn't use the production model the way we were doing it for development. So we had to develop a new secondary way of controls for the parts, for development parts versus production. So that's a major business process change that happened during this time frame. So we used CMMI version 2. Because our scores looked pretty good, we were in the 80s on our previous assessment, we decided to go to maturity level 3, which there's some of the areas will change and some of the areas, most areas change. Additional practices are in the areas are added. Some don't. So there's 12, but then I also added a new practice area called incident resolution. I specifically asked for that because I know I've been reading the model and I'm just trying to understand it. Incident resolution is really about how you do the corrective action CAPA process more. And I really wanted to look at that. And most medical device companies too. I mean, one of the parts in the practice area originally was estimating, which makes sense from a new project, from product development. And it makes sense from a company like Innovize, where we're a contract manufacturer. We do a lot of estimating. Most med device manufacturers, though, do very little estimating because that's more of a financial control as you set the standard cost of the part and what's the cost to build it. In project development, you're doing a lot of more estimating on resources and activities. So we stayed with a lot of those. And so the results of our December 2018, level 3, as you can see, actually across the top here, we were just looking at these areas originally. So these others were added, and basically on what existing ones, this much more questions were asked. So this stuff is pretty much the same as what previously, actually what our assessor said that we had done better in many of the areas. She saw improvement in those practice areas at level 2. But at level 3, more things are being asked. And so there's some deficiencies here we need to be working on. Incident resolution was all new. So partial here, I think this is a good one. And then, we were actually satisfying some stuff at level 3 on incident resolution, which is interesting. So that's some of, as you're going to see, some of the FDA regulations and the ISO standards drive certain activities. And some of those, inherently, you will pass at a higher level because you've been building the systems to meet those requirements and those standards. As I told some people in the past, if you're ISO certified and FDA registered and meeting those requirements, you're going to be pretty good on some of these areas because you've been working for years making sure they're working well. What you're going to find is some areas that you never even thought about because this is not in the regulations, like estimating. Like many companies don't have the practices for estimating because there isn't anything in the regs that say you have to do estimating. So our overall number was 73. We dropped, but we went up a level. So I expected my number to drop because of that. So we ended up moving along. So what I then did, I summarized these years. So configuration management, as you can see, these are the 4 assessments, went up, and then here we went to level 3 and went down. Estimating went up a little bit with our improving our business process. Governance went down because we looked at level 3. Implementation infrastructure went down with level 3. Monitoring control went down with level 3. Performance measurement, this stuff went down. We learned more things. Product integration went up with level 3. Planning went down. Product QA went down a little bit. Technical solution went down. Incident resolution, first time at this. Supplier agreement management was done here early on at 81, but it's not part of the standard practices right now in the program. We overall see our numbers. So looking at this, I'm going to be talking to my assessor, and so for our next one this year, it can be later this year, this is what I'd be proposing that we'd be looking at doing is I'd like to look at configuration management and technical solution, which are some high ones, and we know pretty well, but provide documentation with those That's one of the ways that's the next sort of deeper dive and just the discussion is product documentation. I would propose that we don't do product integration again. We've done so well at this that I'd rather spend the time on other areas. This one's not being done because we didn't do it before. But really, spend a little more time and more people involved. So as our next steps, continue with the level 3 reassessment again. I want to include more people. So at our last assessment, we expanded who was in the meetings, the assessment meetings. So I actually was bringing people from the production floor in for some of the meetings. The entire executive team was brought in for the governance. Previously, only the operations and quality side were in the governance type questions because governance originally didn't have its own area. So now it does. So I had the entire executive team there. They thought it added significant value. So we're going to keep doing that next one. And then we wanted to look at add some documentation review as part of the foundational practices in the areas that we know we're doing well, but let's prove it then. That's where we're sort of at, and that's been our journey. And I expect things going up and down. And we are always on a continuous improvement journey here. We're trying new things in new areas. We have a big lean projects going on, and we're actually tracking costs for those type of lean projects. But we're trying to change business processes throughout the company all the time. So that's all I have for my slides. Questions?
Terrific. Thanks, Mark. We'll open it up to Q&A. As I mentioned before, you can submit your questions either through the chat box or through the Q&A box. I did have a question with regard to slides and the recording. We are recording this webinar. We'll be posting the recording and the slides on MDIC's website, and I'll send an email to all registered attendees once that is posted, likely in the next week or so.
Thanks, Stephanie. This is George. There's also a couple questions in the chat box that or the Q&A box that I jumped on, but I'll repeat them here for everybody. And one was, how does that, and you asked this one, how does that final percentage correspond to a maturity level? And Mark addressed that, but I'd like to specifically add here that while we're using the CMMI framework in this program, this pilot program, and many of you may have some familiarity with CMMI and its maturity levels specifically being assigned, we are using an approach in the model that is not assigning those maturity levels. And I know this is kind of a bit of engine room and in the weeds sort of stuff. So while we're certainly selecting practices and considering different levels of maturity within those, it's not as if Mark's organization or any of the participating organizations get assigned a maturity level 2 or a maturity level 3. That's by design in this program. And specifically, that was chosen by the FDA and our early participants. We did not want to come and say, hey, you get benefits when you have achieved maturity level 2, or you get benefits when you achieve maturity level 3. It was felt that by doing that, we were potentially setting up another compliance check the box type of approach. And rather than saying, you've reached the target with a specific maturity level, we really wanted to foster that culture of continuous improvement and learning. And so while you might be familiar with the model assigning such and such organization level 3, you will not see that in this particular program. The other question was, and I'm not completely sure if I tried to answer this in the Q&A box, another question that came, which is which requirements are being referred to in RPM, requirements development management. Yes, that's exactly right. That's the name of one of the practice areas that we're leveraging in the framework. And so generally what we're talking about here is looking at practices and capabilities and how that organization collects requirements for the medical device products and services that they're delivering that are essentially part of what they're regulated under. So that can be anything from such as Mark, he's a contract manufacturer, so the requirements that he gathers, how he manages those, how he manages changes to those, how he goes about validating those particular requirements, it's all the practices that are in the model. Those general practices are applicable for manufacturers of high-risk devices, low-risk devices, contract sterilizers, any number. So it's looking at the requirements that are applicable to those particular products and services and how they're managed throughout the particular life cycle. I think there was another question here for Cisco, so I'll let you take that one, Stephanie, to pitch over to Cisco.
Sure. So, Cisco, can you explain how the Case for Quality VIP initiative fits into the FDA's Bring MedTech Manufacturing Home initiative? Also, will any other Case for Quality initiatives be under that umbrella?
Well, under which umbrella exactly? If it's under the Case for Quality or
the Bring MedTech Home umbrella.
Yeah, so I think the all of that is covered underneath there, but the Case for Quality, the VIP initiative, is actually part of what's under that umbrella for establishing a third-party mechanism. One that'll allow us to really use a lot of what we've already put into practice, but make that a sustained and operational option and mode for future activities. It allows us then to start working and partnering with, other efforts, other organizations to make sure that we're, for lack of advancing a lot of what can be done within the manufacturing space, as much as possible here domestically, and then, where it spreads also internationally from there, but the focus is going to start here. So the VIP program is if you look under that initiative for establishing that third-party effort, that's exactly where it fits.
Great, thank you, Cisco. Mark, question to you. Thank you for sharing the results from your continuous improvement journey. Impressive results. Can you share if you have seen benefits in your business operations as a result of these improvements?
Yes. So we've been working on, we track, tons of metrics in our process. We've seen improvements continually over the years here, trying to improve profitability, trying to improve, on-time delivery, trying to improve the overall product quality. It's a little more difficult for us to say specifically since we don't build the same product all the time. I mean, we have 2,000 different products, but it might be one product might be ordered every 3 years, one might be ordered every 2 weeks. So the model mix is really mixed up. I mean, it's a variety of different kind of parts, and there's a variety of different other pressures depending on the age of the product and price points, and trying to deal with the industry wants to we want to reduce costs, and so we have to make continuous improvement. So overall, we're seeing a general increase in operational efficiencies and improved margins. We are seeing less issues across the board with communication, and we're trying to move from the firefighting mode. And actually, if you go on the chart that I drew back, go back about right near the beginning, the third, that X and Y. Yeah, there we go. So we were down, I'd say we were down in the lower left quadrant, moving towards the upper quadrant. I think we're now actually in the upper right quadrant, lower part of it. I think we're maybe about 3.5 on the compliance side, and we're probably about 3.5 on the continuous improvement side. But we have a lot of momentum now moving. So I think from a process, where do you think we're at? I think we're moving along, and we're seeing it in a lot of the numbers, over the years. So.
Great, thank you, Mark. Cisco, a follow-up question on the Bring MedTech Home. Will there be any other Case for Quality initiatives that fall under that Bring MedTech Home umbrella?
Yes, actually, I think there will be more of them as we move forward. It's a very broad umbrella. A lot of the initiatives are geared towards, as we keep learning things, tackling smaller bits and pieces along the way. I don't have an answer as to which ones immediately they are just yet, but that was intended to help cover a lot of that effort and activity.
Hey, Stephanie, I also see a question in the chat.
if a medical device manufacturer is already enrolled in the MDSAP program, what are the additional benefits in the Case for Quality program? Cisco or Kim, I don't know who wants to start with, or Mark, I don't know who wants to start with that one.
So I can take a stab, at least from the standpoint of what the agency is offering. I think, and we heard a lot about this during the Capability Counts conference and that the Institute had, that, you know, that's enough to kickstart things, but the reality of the matter is that once manufacturers start going down this journey and finding some other opportunities just to operate, to drive some improvements in their business, and Mark can probably speak to that, there's probably a lot more benefits that are more organizational or business related than what we're offering. But from the FDA standpoint, we are, there's an increased amount of confidence, right? We're not looking at just what the normal compliance bar is. And while MDSAP does a very good job of covering that portion along the lines for a really global harmonized, from a globally harmonized standpoint, it doesn't get us the insights into some of the other areas. And what we're seeing, even in what's being reflected back from the participants now, where it's looking past just what is normally traditionally covered in the quality system silo. It's looking at a lot of the business operations. It's looking at some of these other areas that have a very big impact on how that functions, how that operates, and typically haven't seen the same level of rigor or opportunity for improvements. So that extra reach, that extra visibility, and I think a lot of the commitments that the organizations who've been participating and transparency that they've shared with us gives us a different degree of both confidence and a different way of being able to look at how we traditionally do our reviews. That's where we are able to offer a lot of the streamlining, a lot of the modifications that we're looking to do from a review standpoint. It's that, I think, that offers the biggest benefit. I think for companies beyond what MDSAP is offering, but it is, and we've recognized that from the very beginning, very much a business decision for a lot of organizations.
I want to just piggyback. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about a couple weeks ago was that what this program does, it takes the organization from a cultural point of view, from just being, I must meet my my procedures and that's it, versus thinking about continuous improvement. So the intent, the real intent is, say, you're culturally changing your organization to look for continuous improvement. That's what the real driver is here. I mean, there's the organization, I mean, we'll measure it through productivity and other things, but culturally is the organization willing to make changes? And previously with just compliance-based, you know, I'm in quality, and typically the quality people are actually the hardest people sometimes to change because it's working. Don't break it. We have to make it improvements because it's compliant, but it's not actually solving real problems that you may not see normally.
And just to piggyback off of what Cisco and Mark have already said, so we're in the process of collecting quantitative case studies, if possible, for participants in the program to see how their improvement activities have impacted their performance. But outside of this program, we have several of those types of case studies for other organizations and other industries that have adopted CMMI successfully. And if you go to the CMMI website, which I think is probably linked in one of these links, you'll be able to find those. But I can just give some quick, for example, from Alliance, they were able to see a 39% increase in on-time performance, 71% increase in on-time budget, and a 53% increase in customer satisfaction. Just as examples of the kind of business performance we're hoping to see for organizations involved in this program as well.
Great, thanks Kim, and thanks Mark and Cisco. I want to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. A couple of announcements about some upcoming events. Our next Case for Quality Forum is June 20th in Arlington, Virginia. These are a great opportunity to gather the quality community together to talk through this and other MDIC Case for Quality initiatives. You can learn more about the pilot or the program through all sorts of links that have been provided. I threw one more up here. And then finally, our next MDICx webinar will be coming up on June 18th. That will be from our Science of Patient Input initiative, where we will be discussing some tools for advancing patient-centered medical device clinical trials. So thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for joining us.